Hello, everybody, and welcome to the April edition of the Rising Tide Talks. I'm Matt, Roleplay Chat Capelli, and today we're going to be talking about controlling and diversifying your sales platforms. I think specifically digital ones. I don't know if we're going to get into physical ones as well, but if we do, hey, why not? And we're joined today by Alan Bahr of Gallant Games. Please, hype Alan up in the chat and get yourselves all excited. How's it going, Al?
It's good. How are you?
It's good.
Good.
It's good. As good as it can be, I suppose.
Right.
And yeah, in our conversation today, Alan, we're going to be talking about controlling and spreading out and diversifying our sales platforms for our TTRPG products. I kind of split my questions up into three pillars.
Okay.
The first is kind of just like high level philosophies around why and things like that. Ooh. You might want to be doing this kind of thing. The second, and you can lean on your own personal experiences or advice that you've heard from others and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Then we'll kind of get into some more crunchy advice. And I've actually fielded the server already, and there's some really interesting questions from folks who know more about this than I do.
Oh boy.
Who asked some more like specifics and specificity.
There's a good shot they know more than I do, so we'll see how this goes.
Well, hey, no stress. If you're not sure what the answer should be, don't feel obligated to come invent something or what have you. And then, of course, as always, there's kind of the latter half of the show. We're going to have live audience questions. So for people here in the audience tonight, Domil will probably link up the kind of the thread that you can go to ask your questions, and I'll use that to kind of gauge, how fast or slow to take the conversation tonight to make sure I leave enough time for any of the questions that come up live. Does that sound like a good plan, Alan?
I'm at your disposal.
Fantastic. Well, let's start with just some, quote unquote foundational stuff.
Yeah.
When we say controlling your sales platforms, what do you mean?
Yeah. So there's both a simple answer and a complicated answer. The simple answer is knowing how each sales platform operates and your ability to use it to its best intent, right? The more complicated answer is, as a small business, we don't have the ability to enact significant policy changes at a lot of these places by ourselves, right? We're just not fiscally big enough to throw our weight around to get results. And that means you're and this is true of the internet in general, you're just at the mercy of the large players in the game when they make decisions, right?
Yeah.
If somebody decides to change their fees they take, you often don't have a solution.
That's it. If they're taking 60% of what you're making out of your product,
right,
it's either you leave or you just swallow it. Yeah.
Right. And so, but what happens is, as things move on the internet or things change or laws get passed and impact your marketing, and we'll go into some specifics about this, you have to be able to control both where the data resides, where the revenue is coming from, and understand how to respond and mitigate and make thoughtful, cohesive, and intelligent decisions, not just knee-jerk reactions.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of what we're talking about here tonight is, how can you sort of establish a strong foundational element that provides you with places to make decisions and to be able to have that sort of backstop that lets you be a successful publisher?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's a perfect starting point, I think. As far as your own experiences working in this space, what would you say kind of made this an important thing for you personally?
I've been lucky. And it's still sort of luck that's, 90% hard work, 10% catching the lucky break because you're ready for it. For the last 5 years, Gallant's been my full-time job. What I do is I make RPGs for a living.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't claim we've seen resounding success, but we're successful enough that I generally can know I'm going to make my monthly salary. But part of that is I used to work in the software world before as a product manager and project manager. And so what that means is I kind of came into this with an experience that said, I know how to build multiple pipelines to provide project-based redundancy to protect myself,
mm-hmm.
and how to analyze that risk. And so this has always been something I've known how to do from my corporate background. And the last 2 years or so, I've really been making a push to communicate that to other publishers to help them, get moving. Because the industry is changing rapidly, and it's scary. And I'd rather folks know that, there's good advice out there.
Yeah, definitely. And I think putting our heads together as a community of creators, publishers, and what have you,
Right.
maybe we don't have the weight individually to ask for change, but I think you're onto something when you say that if we're organized and if we, make sense of our situation, we might be able to kind of push for certain policy changes and things, right?
And the important thing is you have to understand what is a battle and what is a war and where it's okay to step back, right? And if you don't have the bigger scope and you don't have these diversified foundations that we're talking about, everything becomes a war because you only have one front to fight on, right? And so this is significantly about equipping ourselves to survive ups and downs of the future. Because I love role playing games. Like I made it my life for the last 10 years. It was a lot part of my life before that. My collection of role playing games is huge. Anybody who knows me knows I love supporting indie publishers, and I would hate to see any of those wonderful voices disappear. So I'm trying to make sure everybody has something they can start from, right? And all this advice I'm going to give today is very much, this is what worked for me, and I'm giving it to you because I expect you to take it and change it or iterate it or do your own research and build what works for you, because what works for me won't always work for everybody, right? So this is sort of trying to give you a springboard to jump from so you can land at the right spot.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's a fantastic caveat because circumstances will always be a little different for every person, but we're definitely here to pick your brain. Maybe one other question, again, kind of at this high level introductory stuff, but when we say that we want to kind of diversify where we're selling things or take more control of where we're selling things, what problem are we trying to solve by doing this? Like, why are we doing this, I suppose, is what I'm asking.
Yeah. There's a lot of problems, and I think trying to distill it down to one problem actually is a problem. You don't want to do that, right?
Fair enough. Yeah.
So I'll just give two examples well, no, I think it's good because I want to give two examples to illustrate that. First, the really obvious one is money, right? Places that distribute your digital games or physical games, they take a cut, right? And if you are only in one channel and they change their revenue sharing agreement, oftentimes you don't have a recourse and you're just losing money overnight, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Maybe not losing money, but you're not making as much. So, and that's an immediate, very obvious, like if I'm in multiple channels, if I have multiple ways to get my games to people, I can respond to that, right? It's not all eggs in one basket. But there's a lot of nuance to this. So I'm going to use an example for DriveThruRPG here. DriveThruRPG, predominant digital distribution platform.
Oh, yeah, that's the big one for sure.
Arguably one of the predominant physical distribution platforms with their print-on-demand service, right? If they raise their prices on their print, you now have to respond to that, right? If that's your only source of printing your books, it takes time, it takes money, it takes effort, it takes stress, it takes research to move that around or create backups. So if you have that plan from the start, it's easier. But another example is you don't have the emails of all your customers who buy your stuff in DriveThru. You can email them under DriveThru's guidelines, but if they change those guidelines, if they have to comply with like a European privacy law, not GPSR, but a couple years ago there was a new one, and they had to opt everybody out rather than opt everybody in. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I'm saying that changes the access because you don't have those customers. You're at DriveThru's mercy for how they communicate that, how they manage that. You can lose half or more of your email list overnight, and you had no recourse, you have no say, right?
Yeah.
So it's not just about money, but it's about building the tools you need to remain engaged with and connected to the communities that crop up around these games.
Yeah, and that's a fantastic point. I hadn't even thought of the communities that want to support you, right? If supporting you through DriveThruRPG and you have no way to update them about a new game coming up or a Kickstarter or whatever, it gets tricky. It gets tricky when you're at the mercy of somebody else. Definitely.
Right.
Yeah.
And we're small enough. We're all always going to be at the mercy of somebody. The goal is to be at the mercy of as many people as possible. So if one turns out to be bad, you can pivot.
I like that. Yeah, definitely.
Right? Like I'm not gonna pretend like this is all good or like we're making ethical choices. To a degree, we are just trying to ensure our survival, and it's okay to recognize that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I really appreciate, Alan, how you went straight to the brass tacks talking about money, because at the end of the day, that is an important factor in the decisions that independent publishers are making, that small writers and whatnot, like that is what is going to allow somebody to fund their next project or to iterate on their thing. So it's super relevant.
Or make rent and eat. Like let's not just talk about projects, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. The livelihood. I had a couple of questions from folks in the community. Again, that I thought kind of spoke to this high
Yeah,
level, more foundational piece.
fire away.
This first question comes from Always Nevers, and they ask, "Is there conventional sales wisdom that you have found that doesn't resonate within the TTRPG space?"
Yes. So you will often hear that retail prices need to be 5 times to 8 times, or sometimes 10, the COG, which is cost of goods, right? So
Hmm.
if it costs me all in, let's say it cost me $5 to produce this game, I would need to sell it at a minimum 25, probably 50, right? The scale at which we produce games at, that's not viable, right? The Gallant's successful, but if I price all my games at 5 times or even 10 times, nobody would buy a lot of my games. It's just they become the RPG industry has a deflated sense of monetary value for the product. Okay. And
Yeah.
what that means is when we're selling stuff, most RPG publishers are direct to consumer. Not a lot of us, I mean, I go through retail, but retail is not a significant portion of my monthly revenue. Some months is better than others. And, around Gen Con, it gets a lot better. But like for the most part, most of my sales are direct to consumer, which means I can get away with a smaller multiplication of my COG, right?
Hmm.
And that's important to consider because then you have to start weighing why you're making the decision, right? Why am I in retail if it's so much harder to make money? Well, the answer is the presence looks good, or I want to be able to tell people, hey, your store can order it, right?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Things like that. So, that's one piece. I think another piece is the value of a lot of people, and it's hard to say the industry because we're a niche of a niche, and then on top of that, we're all an additional niche inside that, right? Like, yes, we make RPGs. We are not in the same industry as Hasbro.
Hmm.
Like, it's a totally the scale they operate at, the budget they operate at. It's a totally different industry.
Yeah, it's really not comparable. Even the audience size is not comparable, like, yeah.
It's not. It's yeah. It's completely. As a former data analyst, like I wore a lot of hats in software world. It's a useless data set, right? You can't use it.
Hmm.
So, like when they print books, they are not paying more than $2 to $4 for each print book. So when they sell it at $35 on Amazon, they're still making plenty, right? Like we don't get to operate at that scale. Printing 1,000 copies of a book like the PHP would probably run you $7-8 or
Hmm.
more, depending on your printer, right? So we have to have these decisions, and we have to understand the broader scope. So what you have to do is you have to look at the advice you're being given. You have to look at why that advice is valid, right? Why do people say to price it 8 times COG? Well, they're saying that because when you sell it to the distributor, they buy it at 50% of value. They sell it to the retailer at 60% of value. So you're making that difference between the 50% and your price, right? So you need to price it like in the step tiers, right? But if you're selling direct to consumer, you're removing a bunch of those tiers. More of the profits coming to you. You can afford to make a different decision. So it's not about what business advice is good and bad. It's about understanding the reasons that advice is being given, and then knowing where and when you can make changes or cut out various pieces.
That makes a lot of sense. I have another question here, not to like bounce too quickly to something else, but I want to make sure I can get to as many of them as we can.
Anyway,
Celtic the Nephew asks, how soon should someone diversify their platforms versus focusing on one audience/platform, especially for folks starting out, if it's their
yeah,
first
absolutely.
published thing? Is there a reason or scenario where diversifying is maybe not a good option?
Yeah. So the first caveat is if you are a small press, like a 1 person or 2 person job, every additional sales platform is a multiplier. It's not just +1, it's +2, +4. There's a multiplying amount of workload here.
Hmm.
So you have to be cognizant first and foremost of your workload. Having 10 sales platforms is no good if it takes you 6 months to roll them all out every time you get a new product, right?
Yeah, totally.
If I were telling somebody new, I would say pick the big one you want to go with. Well, using an example, we'll say you start with DTRPG, right? And then I would say always, always, always start with another platform that you control as much as possible, right? So like I would say set up a Shopify e-store, right? Because you get to keep your customer data, you get access to all that on the back end. The fees are like 3%, right? There's a $5 a month plan. The overhead is low.
Hmm.
It's pretty intuitive. It's the largest platform, so it's relatively stable. Like you're getting the most bang for your buck, and for whatever reason, let's say drive-through goes down, you still have your e-store, right? Let's say drive-through changes their policies and you want to pull out, you still have your e-store, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I would always say have two and have one that you have a lot of control over as much as possible. Now you'll never have full control, obviously, because chances are you're not building your own website from scratch on your own server using your own software, right?
That's it.
Like most of us can't do that.
Yeah.
So you have to make those compromises, but being smart about it is what you want to do. Then go from there. Like for a long time, Gallant, we just used drive-through. We used our web store for digital. Print, we did drive-through, and we did our distributor and our web store, right? And that was it. Recently, we moved some games onto itch for being judicious with them. Like I'm only putting the big ones that sell well historically there. And part of that was just testing the platform. I'd never used it. I wanted to get a feel for it. I'd seen some data, so I had some suspicions, and so I was like, I'm gonna, run a test. We've talked some other places about spinning out stores, but again, it comes down to, what's the most bang for your buck, and where can you afford to put the effort in on a regular basis.
Yeah, and I mean, I've never published anything, so people listening take what I'm saying with an enormous pile of salt. But I think, from what I understand, a lot of folks in this community here are maybe making their first ever published game, and,
Right.
and for them it's more about getting something out there.
Absolutely.
Right? It's more about trying your first attempt at compiling this product, maybe collaborating with other people to make it,
Yeah.
and then just putting it out on a platform. And sure, we want it to succeed, but deep down, there's maybe this low threshold for how well we think it's going to do.
I think that's totally valid. My response to that is there's no reason not to position yourself for if it blows up overnight, you have a solution.
Yeah. Yeah.
The effort of setting up your own web store to do this on top of like a drive-through page is minimal.
Mm-hmm.
So you may as well, right?
Yeah, that's solid advice. And then, like you're saying, you have more control over it, right?
Right.
You can see who's been to your website. You can contact them because they provide you their email information and stuff like that. So it's a big win for it's like a low-hanging fruit.
Well, you get to choose what payment method. Like, there's so much more flexibility.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Another question here we have is similar. It talks about advantage. This is from the Darker LARPer, or Dan, and they ask if there are advantages to exclusivity that we should consider, I suppose. And that's kind of the crux of the question is, are there advantages to exclusivity to a platform or method?
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the other side of the coin of our conversation here.
Right.
But I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that, Alan.
Yeah. So I'm going to presume, Dan, and if I'm wrong, feel free to ping me and tell me, and I can adjust my answer. But I'm going to presume you're talking about drive-through, because drive-through is the digital platform that has exclusive or non-exclusive. If I recall correctly, it doesn't have anything like that. Most other platforms don't. So really, we're probably talking about drive-through.
I would imagine so, yeah.
So if we're talking about drive-through, obviously the big difference is the extra 5% they take if you're non-exclusive. It goes from 30% to 35%. So let's say I sell a $10 PDF. It's a difference of 50 cents a sale. That's the immediate answer.
Yeah.
And in exchange for exclusive, you get preferential deal of the day treatment. They say it's weighted, and I don't know what the weighting is in terms of like, is it 60-40? Like, you're more likely to get the deal of the day, 60%, whatever, right? Like, I don't know the specifics of that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not exclusive with them. I still get deals of the day semi-regularly. So like, it's clearly not enough that is made an impact, but I wouldn't say it's significant in terms of how frequently it happens.
Okay, yeah.
But that is a part of it, right? And there's additional things like there's featured stuff like exclusive to drive-through. There's like a featured place. You can't be in there if you're not exclusive, right?
Yeah.
Things like that. So there's some marketing benefits to being exclusive, but the biggest thing is going to be the 5%. Now, notably, that 5% does not preclude you from selling on your own web store.
Okay, that's good to know.
You can be exclusive and sell digital on your web store and on their platform, according to the current rules as is today. So there's no reason not to. They don't prohibit that. And then physical is not prohibited at all. So you can sell physical anywhere.
Okay, that's cool.
It's only digital.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really what you're doing. And but the reason it's digital only is because digital has the lowest overhead for fulfillment. They buy it, boom, done. So you have to do more work when you sell physical, which is why one reason they're probably fine with it being non-exclusive.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I mean, it's great to know that there's these caveats, right? You can have your web store, you can sell them physically at your local game store if you want, and no one's gonna bat an eye. So That's good.
Put them into distribution, sell them on Amazon. You just can't sell the digital copies anywhere but drive-through in your web store.
Yeah.
Now, I will say that doesn't preclude you from comping people PDFs if they buy your game physically.
Okay.
So that's another thing to remember. Like if you do bits and mortar still a thing. It was a thing when I was younger because I'm old now, so I have to say that. When I was a kid, where if you bought it at a physical game store, you got the digital. I know some books print the codes inside now, depending on the company. Modifius is big on that. But that's all still well and good as far as I understand it with their platforms. Obviously, not a lawyer. Read the terms and conditions when you decide to exclusive or non-exclusive. If you have a question, reach out to your drive-through publisher rep. They'll answer it for you. But if I recall correctly, copying people free copies with a physical purchase is still kosher.
Yeah, yeah. And you have the added benefit of getting their email address if you do it. There was somebody who joined us on an RT Talks that said that whenever they sell a physical product of their game, they give them the email address and say, email this email and I'll give you your PDF. And then by virtue of it, or no, it was sign this sheet. Like sign a sheet with your email address so I can send you the PDF. But now you get the added benefit of getting this person's contact information for future sales and things like that.
Right.
Yeah. Awesome. And then we have one other question here from Alex Gray. Yep. And they ask, does your high-level strategy change if a new product doesn't perform as well as you had anticipated? So maybe that's like on a specific platform. I would imagine that's, and Alex, if you're here, I don't know, is Alex here?
Yeah, that's hard to say. That's such a broad question.
Yeah.
The answer is yes, but also no. So I'll start with the no. The answer is no, because I'm small fish, right? Like a product not performing well is, depending on the product, it is the difference of 50 sales versus 100 sales. Now, I'm not diminishing those 50 sales. That's often a big deal. That can be $500-$600, right? But it's not like I printed 1 million copies and then it bombed.
Yeah.
Or I'm not going to be left burning inventory. So a lot of times I can make that up just at cons by running sales or like giveaways for free marketing potential, right? There's solutions that I can enact. And again, to a degree, like Kickstarter has sort of changed that equation, because if you run a Kickstarter, you paid all your money up front. Like if it never sells again, theoretically, if you budget right, you're good to go.
Yeah.
Right? You minimum broke even, hopefully, right? You certainly hopefully made a profit too. And then you get to enjoy what are called long tail sales, which is where it sells over time, you make a little bit of money. And that's one of the things that's allowed me to be successful is I'm very good at engaging the long tail. Like, do my Kickstarters make $1 million? No. But they make enough to make the book. They make enough that I make some profit. I can make a living. And then I'm very good at consistently selling decent amounts of copies for months on end, right? Like, yeah, it took, Tiny Dungeon 2nd edition, took it a couple years, but it several of my games are adamantine. I think aside from Wizards and White Wolf, I might have the most or up there among the most adamantine products on drive-thru.
That's awesome.
Like,
yeah.
And I know that I've said that somebody's going to go prove me wrong. It is true. But I think I've got a half dozen in there or more, right? Which means half dozen of my products are 0.07% of the top sellers on drive-thru.
Yeah.
Right. So then that's from that long tail. That's not because I sold them all on day one or even in the first year. It's about continued focus on selling products over time, because you've already spent the money. You've already put all the effort into it. Now you just get to make money for little investment other than some marketing time. And so by having these diverse platforms, I can do things like run different sales in different places. Like, because drive-thru takes 35%, maybe I have a low margin product. I don't want to run a sale there, but I can do it on my web store because my web store takes 3%, right? I have more dials and levers to play with by having this diversified sales platform. So I can make those adjustments if something changes or goes south.
Yeah, that's really solid advice. I think that's everything I had, Alan, for this kind of more high-level foundational stuff. I don't know if you had any other thoughts that you wanted to kind of get out for context, or if we can jump into the more crunchy stuff.
Let's keep jumping. I'm sure more stuff will come up, and I will say more as we go.
Perfect. So we talked about there being a lot of different platforms that people can use. Off the top of your head, where are your games sold? What platforms do you use?
Yeah, so we use DTRPG, we use Itch, and we use our web store in terms of digital sales. We have toyed with digital sales on Amazon's ebook platform. That was not a success. Would not repeat that. RPGs don't translate to ebook well because of the images and stuff. It's just not doable in any way I've found was maintaining the aesthetically important part of the RPG, right? So I think that's it for our digital platforms at the moment. We've noodled with some other places.
Would you consider like crowdfunding a platform that, because I presume it makes sense, right? Somebody's buying it there, they're getting the PDF right off the bat.
Yeah, sure. So we've done Kickstarter, we've done some backer kit crowdfundings. We primarily use Kickstarter. I've done some on Crowdfunder itself.
Okay.
So we distribute those PDFs through drive-thru or our web store on the back end. So I guess I don't consider them like the channel.
I see.
That's not where I'm sending the PDFs out. But you are correct. That's where people are,
Yeah.
sort of making the purchase. Even though crowdfunding is not a store, I'm not saying that, internet.
So that's good. And then as far as controlling as much of what you can on all these platforms, what kind of tricks or advice might you have to kind of
Yeah.
keep as much of that in your own space
Yeah.
while still using these other platforms?
Yeah. So I start by looking at what data I'm allowed to both manipulate and retain for my own purposes, right?
Okay.
Do I have access to customer emails? If not, how do I communicate with those customers, right? Like itch, technically, like as far as I can tell, and I'm kind of going off memory here, so if I'm wrong, somebody will correct me. But you're actually not allowed to email those customers, even though you have their emails.
Hmm.
You're not supposed to.
Interesting.
And whereas drive-through, you can email them under certain parameters, but you don't have their emails. And then on my Shopify web store, when people buy something, I get their email and they can opt into having me reach out to them, right?
Hmm.
And which is the best of both worlds because I have their information. So if I need to move it, and we use a program called Brevo for our newsletter proper, and it has an integration with Shopify, so it moves when they buy it, it boop, doop, into there, and then I can move the Brevo wherever I want. If I wanted to switch to Mailchimp, I could download them, move them over, stuff like that.
Okay. Okay. Speaking of moving things around and maybe like automation as well, there was a question from Orange Tiki 99 that asks if you have any tricks for automating listings through different platforms. Is that something? I mean, I don't know anything about publishing things on these platforms. So
Yeah.
is there automation involved? And if so, what do you use?
There is no good automation involved for a lot of these platforms, certainly not one that works between all of them.
Okay.
So I will say that. So this is twofold. So for digital stuff, you're sort of stuck unless you have a pretty good technical background. You're kind of stuck just entering each thing.
Hmm.
Like I have a spreadsheet that has all that data, and so I can copy and paste the fields. But I'm still going into each listing and copy and pasting when if I want to list it on itch, copy paste. If I want to drive through, same thing, copy paste. If I want to list it on my web store, same thing, copy paste. Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'm pretty quick about it. Like I can put a new product up on all those places in like 6 minutes to combine for all three tops. Like not a big deal, but it is time. Right.
Hmm.
But yeah, I have a spreadsheet that I keep as a sort of a system of record to be my foundation. Like this is where the ISBNs are stored, the prices, and I have each price in each platform listed with the cut, so I know estimates,
Yeah.
things like that. But yeah, there's no automation for that. For print, that is both easier and harder. So interestingly enough, this is an important thing I want to talk about, and this is one of the big things I want to get across. Drive-through uses Lightning Source. So Drive-through is at the mercy of Lightning Source when it comes to printing and delivering products. If Lightning Source doesn't give drive-through access to anything, there you go. Now, Lightning Source is owned by Ingram Spark. Ingram Spark is the largest print-on-demand distributor of books into bookstores, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. The same files work in both places, which means you can use Ingram Spark to push your books into retail directly. And then you're at the mercy of Ingram Spark. Okay. One other thing that you can do is Shopify, which I use, and I believe WooCommerce has this too. I don't know if some of the other sales platforms do, but it has a Lulu API where you can install this Lulu app, and then I can put my books in Lulu, sell them on my web store. So if somebody goes and buys a copy, it will send it to Lulu, and Lulu will print it and ship it to them, kind of like drive-through would.
Okay.
But Lulu also lets you use that same file to push into retail and sell on their platform all in one go. So the copies that are being sold on my web store can also be funneled into Amazon, Barnes & Noble, bookstores who want it, all that stuff,
Interesting.
as well as Lulu's platform. So for one file, I can get sort of this maximum outreach. And that's why I talk about maximizing your effort, right?
Hmm.
Like if you're going to put effort into something, look at the platforms that give you the most options. Because even if I make $5, like let's say I get one sale on Amazon from that Lulu integration. But over a year, if I'm making $10 off of a sale every month, that's $120, right?
Yeah.
And if I do that for 5 platforms, that's great. All this adds up, and that's that long tail of sales I'm talking about.
Yeah. And this Lulu platform that you're talking about, how does it differ outside of the ability for you to push it to these other platforms? Does it differ in like the cut it's taking or in like
Yes.
certain terms and references? Like how do you kind of balance all of that when you're looking to find print?
Yeah. So the cuts are different.
Yeah.
Lulu, if you're doing this program, they have a calculator as you load your stuff you can tweak all the prices.
Okay, cool.
And they have that for multiple currencies. Lulu, like I personally feel like the print quality is better. There are more options. Like you can do staple bound saddle stitch. So if you want to do zines on your web store through this, you can.
Hmm.
You can do dust jackets. You can do cloth covers. You can do some other things. Now, because it's print on demand, pricier, but those are options. So those are the calculations, right? And so they require different layout files. So I have to lay out each book 3 times when we do this, right? We have to have a drive-through version. We have to have a Lulu version. We have to have, if we print it offset, we have to have an offset print version. And then we also have our PDF. So there's 4 different files, which can make version control a pain. So like you have to know what you're getting into. But if you think it through and you have a plan and you have a really awesome layout artist, shout out to Robert. I love you, buddy. It works out.
That's awesome.
Robert has saved my bacon on layout stuff like that a couple times.
Yeah. No, it's great to have somebody to support you on that stuff, especially if you're not too sure what you're doing. It's your first time or what have you.
Yeah.
I'm sure we have all kinds of awesome layout folks in the Rising Tide Discord server. So
absolutely,
if you're listening to this and you're like, I don't know a layout person, well, get chatting, ask some questions in the server, and I'm sure you can get connected to somebody who's kind of, at your level, who's learning the ropes too, or maybe not. Maybe you want to pay a little premium and get somebody who's more experienced. Speaking of versions and version control, I have a question here from Waywright. And this one's a little bit off topic, a tiny bit, Alan. So don't feel obliged to follow me off the beaten trail. But if you have some insights, I'd love to hear them. Basically, Waywright asks if you could talk a little bit about timelines, specifically for larger projects that might have staggered releases to kind of iterate on the same product, perhaps. It's kind of like incremental in its growth. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
We're talking like Ashcan to alpha to beta to final release.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
I don't have any good thoughts on that because I don't feel like I've ever done it well.
Fair enough.
I will be straight. Like, I have started to hit the point where, generally speaking, with exceptions, my goal is to have it as done as possible before I go to crowdfunding.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to do public iterative stuff as much as I can. So it's unavoidable sometimes, and sometimes the project demands that, and I do that. But I've just never feel like I'm doing it well or right or good. So I just don't like doing it that way. So unfortunately, I'm not the person to ask.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fair. I think I did see a conversation that was taking place in the server not too long ago. I think it might have been in the workflow chat. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. But one little piece of a nugget of advice that was shared there within the community that I thought was interesting was, if you're going to release a second version, I don't know about like 5 or 6 versions, but if you're going to release a second, more updated version of your game, it sounds like a straightforward thing but not everyone would think of. Give that version to anybody who bought the first version. You know what I mean? Like, if they bought the first version, depending on how much you've updated it, you should kind of reach out to the people who supported you in the first run. But Alan, looks like you have something to say. Please.
I want to gently push back on that.
Yeah, go for it.
I think
you know more about this than me.
No. I don't disagree with that advice. I've done similar. I would say identify the most efficient way to do that and do it and be done with it. Right? Like, if you want to give everybody who bought the PDF the new PDF, great. But I would still make them buy the print book because that comes at a cost to you too. Right?
This is true. Yeah.
You can give them, like, I think it's good advice, but I think there's a lot of nuance there that's being missed if you make it so broad, right?
Totally.
I would never say, send me your old Tiny Dungeon and I'll give you a Tiny Dungeon 2nd edition. That'd be financial suicide, right? I might say, here's a discount.
Yeah. No, those are very important caveats. I think the context here was specifically digital products. Yeah. So yes, the physical product, make them go by.
But even then, I don't think it's always appropriate.
Okay, yeah, fair enough.
Right? Like, sometimes new editions come out. Like, there's a lifetime. Like, if you do it within a year or even 2 or 3 years, maybe, sure, right? But if a product's been out for 10 years, I mean, you're allowed to make money on a new edition.
Yeah, that's fair.
You have to make a living too.
Absolutely.
I think there's, like, Tiny Dungeon's been out for, 2017? So almost 10 years, like 8 years. Like, I probably wouldn't give everybody the free, I might give them a discount.
Yeah.
Right? But I would expect people who like it to be willing to pay to upgrade to get a new edition because there's work and effort and time put into it.
Yeah, totally. That's a really valid point. And I think the amount of work and effort put into a new edition or a new iteration kind of factors into that too, right?
We're not talking just updates with like, oh, we made some minor errata or fixed some typos and here's a new PDF, right? That's a different conversation.
Totally.
I'm talking like full-fledged new edition. I think you need to assess where you are, what you're trying to accomplish. If you decide you're from this hobbyist perspective, if you decide you're from states where, that's okay for you, then you should absolutely do that. I don't think that's a problem.
Totally. All right, we have a couple of other questions that came in ahead of time, and I took a peek at the live questions, and we have a handful there too. So I want to make sure we have the opportunity to get through as many as we can. So I'm gonna start firing them off
Fire away.
at you, Alan. We have one from Lucas Zellers, and Lucas asks, "What technology do you recommend for selling your products?" You talked already about quite a few of them, so I'm not sure if there's new ones that you didn't get a chance to look at or talk to. But if not, we can maybe skip ahead to another question.
I think I've said it. I prefer Shopify for my e-commerce platform because the inventory integrates with like conventions and stuff. I can put it all in the same store and manage it that way. But that's a me preference. Like I think WooCommerce, not Salesforce, but Squarespace. There's a lot of options. I mean, do the one that look at them all, assess the one that works best for you, and make that decision.
Perfect. Awesome. Spencer/Pesto asks, how do you balance between promoting storefronts with better revenue splits versus storefronts with more customers, slash customers that might be more familiar with, aka drive-through?
So that's a good question. I mean, read the terms of your terms and conditions. Some publishers and sites drive-through have what I would call a favored nations clause, where you kind of have to split it as much as you can evenly.
Hmm.
Like if you run a sale on your web store, you can only run it for so long before you have to mirror it on drive-through.
Interesting.
Like things like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You can't add 30% to your price on drive-through because it has to be priced the same.
Yeah. Interesting.
So like assess where you're selling and see what the rules are and then form your strategy based on that. I just kind of promote it all at the same level. If I'm going to run a sale, I tend to run it on my web store, but like that doesn't mean I don't run sales on drive-through. I do. Just depends.
Okay, that makes sense. You talked a little bit about it earlier too, right? When if it's maybe not performing as well as you thought, that's when you might kick it into gear on
Right.
drive-through. One last question in the crunchy space, and then of course, Alan, if you had other thoughts that you didn't get a chance to talk about, please take the mic and go and run with it. But I was curious if there's like a product or resource, maybe you've built one or you're aware of one that kind of like lists out some of these fine print stuff that we've been talking about, like the revenue splits and some of the important considerations. Does that exist, or do things change too frequently for it to ever be really relevant?
I think there's a lot of factors that make that hard.
Mm.
Drive-thru's pretty open about their stuff on their website, so you can look at that pretty easily. Same with any of the major e-commerce platforms. They're pretty transparent with the basic level stuff like their cuts, things like that.
Yeah.
Part of the problem is people have different reasons for choosing different things. Like, for example, I know people who won't sell on drive-thru because drive-thru allows generative AI content, right? And no matter what drive-thru's policies are, as long as that policy is in place, they're never going to change their mind,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, in that case, a sheet like that, maybe doesn't do as good, right? And then there's so many different things, even in the US versus different countries. Like drive-thru is a big one, but, Ulysses Field has their own drive-thru-like platform in Germany.
Okay.
There's other places like that, right? So there's all these factors that go into it that I think make it very difficult. If somebody has done that, I don't know about it.
Fair enough. It definitely sounds like a lot of effort for, like you're saying, something that is pretty easy to find. It's at least not hidden on all the platforms that people might be selling their things on. So
Now, read the details because all the hidden stuff's in the details.
yeah, definitely. All right, so I'm looking at the clock. We have about 10 minutes left, and there's a couple questions that were asked live by folks who are here tonight listening in. Now I'm talking to people here. If you have other questions, please post them now, and I'm going to do my best to kind of get them all to Alan before we close out the show. But yeah, we have two questions. The first one, it talks about tariffs. What are your thoughts on the current tariff situation? Do they affect any of your business decisions for the future?
Mm-hmm.
There are sources that say that the book exemption does not apply to RPG books because they are technically games, not books. So curious to hear your thoughts about that.
So there's a lot of information floating around, and it's hard to say what's accurate because to a degree, it depends on how stuff is classified when it leaves port, how it's classified when it enters port, and what the customs agency sees when they inspect it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I will say from practical experience, I know publishers who have been hit by a tariff bill. So it is hitting some game books. I know publishers who haven't.
Okay.
So I do know all books, except for, I believe, Bibles, were at a 27.5% tariff before this to begin with.
Okay.
That was just a sort of static tariff on Chinese books specifically. Books from China, not Chinese books, books from China. And I think Bibles were the sole exception for that. But I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a trade expert, right? I have to do my own research, talk to people, and hope I figure it out. I do know I've been quoted tariff prices
Okay.
for things.
Yeah.
So they seem to be hitting books. And this will probably be different tomorrow. Who knows?
Yeah, seriously.
But to answer the second part of the question, it has absolutely changed what I'm looking at. The next round of campaigns we're doing, we've moved to print on demand fulfillment only because it just moves the onus of that problem off of us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We make less, it sucks. The books aren't as high quality as I can make them, but difference of getting it done on time, not going under from surprise financial stuff, and making a little money to keep us going, or it's just what you gotta do. So we did a pivot for a few projects, and we're doing print on demand only.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes these hard decisions kind of have to pivot and pivot fast. We have another question here from Sorab. Sorab asks, what type of marketing / promotion have you found to work well in promoting your Kickstarter? So we're changing gears a little bit.
I've had the most success with mailing lists, both drive-through and my own, and Facebook ads. I know people who've done well with Google ads. I've never been able to crack that nut.
Yeah. All right. Christopher from at Nat1Advice asks, when bringing a product to a sales platform, there's usually a bunch of information you need to provide that can feel like you're repeating yourself. How do you effectively tailor that information between platforms? You talked about your spreadsheet already. Is there like modifications that you're making or tailoring that you're making?
Only if there's a constraint from the platform, like you have a character limit or something.
Okay.
I don't tend to do much. Like Itch, I put some more time into Itch because you can actually customize your product page on Itch pretty nicely. That's it. Otherwise, the data is often the same because I want it to be consistent. If you read it on the web page, I want it to also say the same stuff on the back of the book as much as possible. And on this other web, I want it to be consistent because consistency is what drives search engine results.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's slowly changing. But, when I was coming up, that was what we were taught. And I've tried to stick to that as much as possible.
Awesome. Darker Larper Dan asks, is there such a thing as too many platforms for diversification?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. You don't want to take up too much of your time posting.
It's whenever you can't maintain the workload.
Yeah, exactly. We have another question. This one's from Demil. Demil asks, would the current tariff situation affect the planning of crowdfunding campaigns? You talked about the print on demand. Are there other pivots that you've had to do because of this?
At this moment, no, but I am keeping an eye on it and preparing to do pivots if I have to.
All right. Awesome. It looks to me like we were able to, quickly run through all the questions that were sent in live.
Ooh.
So with the last 5 minutes, Alan, I wanted to throw the microphone back to you to give us any parting words of wisdom that you have about, diversifying or taking more control over your sales platforms. If there's something maybe, I didn't ask you and that was kind of itching at the back of your brain that you wanted to get out.
No, I think this is a good high level concept. There's a lot of specifics. So publishers, if you can find somebody who knows this, ask. I don't know very many publishers who want to gatekeep or hide this knowledge, right? We're happy to talk about it. I've made a lot of mistakes. I'm happy to let you learn from them so you don't have to make them. I don't know, just ask and then listen thoughtfully, listen carefully. You don't have to do what people tell you, but you should at least consider why they're saying it, right? There's a reason I've made games for 10 years and managed to make it a living. I'm not a best at it, but I've been able to be consistently successful. And that's so I like to think my advice means something.
No, definitely.
Right? I don't expect people to listen to it all the time or follow it to the T, but hopefully it's a good starting point. And I think all publishers just want that, right? If you ask, listen, you can do your own thing, but be thoughtful, understand why the advice exists the way it does, and then move from there. Making a knee-jerk decision is going to do more harm than good. So anytime you have to make a choice, especially if it involves making a living or making a business you're building, be thoughtful, walk through it, be as careful and wise as you can, and then do it.
Absolutely. And Alan, I'll say, I think anybody who's been doing something for 10 years and is making a living off of it is definitely worthy of being listened to. So thank you for being here and sharing your wisdom. If folks listening wanted to find you on the internet or find some projects that you have going live, where can they do that?
I'm on Blue Sky at Alan Bahr, ALNBHR.net. Gallant Night Games is on there too. All of my projects for sale are generally on drive-through or in my web store. There's not perfect parity because I put a lot of the smaller stuff on drive-through only. and I just haven't made the time to move it. I don't follow my own advice sometimes, like we all do. I don't know. I'm in this Discord. I'm in my Discords. You can hit me up. I'll happily talk or answer questions. If you want a meeting with me, like I set time aside every week to donate to help. So if you like, I might not be able to say yes right away, but I'll try to find time to help anybody who asks. So just reach out.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, yeah, so I'd like to thank you again, Alan, for being here to talk to us about diversifying and controlling your sales platforms and truly appreciate your offer to kind of help folks out of the community if they have questions about all of this stuff. I'd like to encourage people to go follow Alan. And while you're at it, come follow us at TTRPG Rising Tide on Blue Sky, on Threads, and I think on some of the other places too. But if I'm not mistaken, those are the two that we're the most active on. And I think that's it. So be sure to keep spreading the good word of the TTRPG Rising Tide community. Thanks again, Alan, for being here to chat about games.
Of course.
Yeah.
Happy to help. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. And I've been Matt at roll_play_chat on all socials. This has been another RT Talks. Remember, folks, a rising tide lifts all boats. Bye, everybody.